Hello everybody. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to cover the last few slides of the lesson on defining Germany. We didn't quite get to the end of it, so I just thought it would be useful to record a quick commentary and explain some of the points so that you can finish your mind mapping on this particular topic, defining Germany, reconciling unity and division. As in class, it would be helpful if you have the printout with the notes in front of you, and obviously have the mind map in front of you, exactly as if you were in a lesson. And obviously the advantage of the video, unlike class, here you can pause the video, so you can pause me if needed. So let's get moving. So I'll just go on to the next slide. So as you can see, that slide just quickly summarises the main points that we've covered so far. So just have a quick look through, just get the information back into your head. So the first point, German nationalism, no single country called Germany, loosely connected collection of separate states, ruled on the whole by powerful monarchs, growing feeling, especially amongst the German middle classes, that it was necessary to have a single united Germany, because a large single Germany would give more power to the middle classes, in particular economic power, but remember they also aspired to having political power as well, taking power away from the monarchs. So a single monarch for the whole of Germany who would give them more political power. Creation of Germany, in a nutshell, 1871, there was a war between Prussia and France, which Prussia won. The smaller German states felt threatened by France during the war, and so sided with Prussia. So at the end of the war, the rulers of the smaller German states agreed to combine with Prussia to create a new single united German states called the Second German Empire. And of course the King of Prussia became the Emperor of Germany, and the capital of Prussia, Berlin, became the capital city of Germany. The Prime Minister of Prussia, Bismarck, became the Chancellor of Germany. We then moved into the issue of differences. So the first one was beneath the surface, although arguably you could say there was a united Germany 1871. The sort of key debate that you will have to engage with in the exam is that it was actually still a very divided country, and so you need to be able to articulate in essay form what the divisions were. Partly because the new Germany covered a vast area, so there were distinctive regional differences, and we looked at some of those, in particular the Protestant north versus the Catholic south, or southwest in particular, but regional loyalties to local monarchs. And the local monarchs of the separate states continue to exist, remember, within the German Empire, more of which we'll look at in a later lesson. And then the next one, kind of picking up that idea, in theory, the new German Empire was an equal partnership of 22 monarchs and 3 city-states, and they were all equal in theory, because it was a voluntary union in 1871, in which they agreed between them that the King of Prussia would become the Emperor of Germany. But in reality, the King of Prussia, the new Emperor, the Kaiser, was more powerful than the others. It was the sort of unstated truth in 1871 that Prussia was the protector. Prussia had defeated France. The smaller monarchs needed the might of Prussia to protect them. So beneath that sort of voluntary union, and the reality of the fact that Prussia was more powerful, it did have the potential to create tensions between the different royal families that made up the empire. So those tensions we'll be exploring as we go into this first depth study. So that's where we got to. So we just started the final strand, authoritarianism against liberalism, and so we'll sort of go into that. So we did cover this in a nutshell point, but let's just go back through it again. So in reality, the new German Empire was authoritarian in its structure. Remember, always be aware of those sort of keywords. Power from the top of the pyramid, power with the upper classes in this particular case. Prussia, which was the largest state, the King of Prussia as the head of the upper classes in Prussia, had most of the power in Prussia, and now similarly within Germany. Okay, so political power, decision making to make laws, lay with the upper classes. Nevertheless, the middle classes, that sort of key group, who are growing, a growing group in the 19th century, supported the creation. They were very much on the side of the upper classes, on the side of the King of Prussia in the creation of a German empire, for the reasons we've said, that it would benefit them economically, it would give them wealth. Also, Bismarck, who was the first head of government in Germany, knew that middle class support was essential for the new Germany to industrialise. Okay, so it's a new country. It's now got to make its way in the world and fight for prestige and reputation with the other countries of the world. And that new Germany wants to join sort of Britain and France as being what was known at the time as a great power. And Bismarck knew that to do that he needed middle class support, because the great movement, the great development of the 19th century was the Industrial Revolution, and strong countries needed industry to make their weaponry, to provide their military, and if the new Germany was to get on in the world, it needed to industrialise, which meant he couldn't sort of like disregard the middle classes and not allow them to have a say in the new country. So Bismarck therefore needed to tap into that. Here was an opportunity in 1871 to create a constitution for the way in which the new Germany would exist. So he created a constitution which gave the middle classes, in theory at least, more political power. So it would be a shared power between the upper classes and the middle classes. And of course the main vehicle for the middle classes to have a say in the running of the country is the great thing we take for example, we just take for granted in the modern day today, and that's what we call a parliament, a representative assembly, an elected body that it represents the people. So the new Germany that was created in 1871 had a parliament. The lower house was called the Reichstag, and which gave the middle classes a say in the running of the country, which was very different. But that was that was an illusion rather than a reality, and that's what we need to explore and develop over the next few lessons. So now I've covered a lot of that, but let's just unpick that in some of the details here, which is the sort of slide that we reached at the end of last lesson. So let's just make sure you're sort of happy with these points. So the first one there, Prussia, which had taken the lead in creating a united Germany, was authoritarian in the way it ruled. So remember, we're talking there, the Prussian state, okay, had been there for hundreds of years. So the King of Prussia and the Prussian state is still the largest state within the new German Empire, and it is still a semi-independent state. So the Emperor of Germany is still the King of Prussia, and he still will rule his country state called Prussia in the usual way. And it was authoritarian, there's that key word, which basically meant that power lay at the top. Okay, so rule from above by the royal family and the upper classes. And so there was little interest. The Prussians, it was the Prussian upper classes, it was completely against the grain to allow the people below that line there, that dotted line, the sort of like lower classes, the masses as we're sometimes called, it was against the grain to give them any real political influence in the running of the country. So it was against the grain although they had representative bodies, elected bodies, there was a parliament in Prussia, and the Prussian parliament was called the Landtag. Okay, it was against the grain really to give the Landtag much influence in the running of the country. So the voting system that had been created in Prussia in 1850, just after those revolutions that we talked about, had given an illusion of democracy. It had given an illusion to the middle classes, these groups here, that they had more say. But the reality was, and this is how you can see it, the Prussian Landtag was weighted, the voting system, so that the upper classes had 3 votes for the middle classes, who had 2 votes, and the lower classes had 1. So it was a weighted voting system. So when you looked at the actual people who sat in the Landtag, who shared power with the Prussian king, actually the Landtag was dominated by the upper classes, because although the upper classes were the smaller group, because that in the voting system, they every time a nobleman voted, their vote counted for 3 votes. It shifted the balance in the Landtag so that the nobility had a greater say than the lower classes, even though the lower classes were numerically the largest group in Prussia. So there's the point there. But in spite of that, the mood of 1871, the creation of this new Germany, by defeating France, even though these people, and in particular the middle classes, but also the lower classes, okay, in spite of the fact that the new Germany that was created, and we'll look at that in more detail about the way that worked, it was very popular, okay. Even though it was the Prussian king who created this new Germany, and the Prussian king was notorious for not really giving ordinary people a say in the running of Prussia, the mood across the whole of Germany was one of, well, this is a great opportunity, okay? So once the war was over and the King of Prussia sat down with Bismarck to look at what's the new Germany going to look like and how is it going to be run, the middle and the lower classes hoped that they would have political influence, that the new Germany would be a fairer and more democratic Germany in its institutions. So the National German Parliament, they hoped, would not have a weighted vote. The National German Parliament would be a much fairer institution. So there were those hopes. And again, don't worry about that now, because we will do a whole lesson on the Constitution, how it actually worked. And Bismarck knew that he couldn't ignore those hopes, in particular from the middle classes. Okay, so that's the word liberal, isn't it? Okay, the middle classes were liberals. They wanted a more democratic Germany, this new country that was created. They hoped that there would be a national parliament that would have a fairer voting system, and that would give the middle classes a greater say in the running of the country. And Bismarck knew that they felt that, because he knew he needed them. He needed the middle classes. He needed to harness their strengths for the new Germany. And in particular, as we said, he knew that this new Germany needed a strong army, and a strong army would be made out of industry, and it was the middle classes who were the leaders of German industry. And also the lower classes, the masses of uneducated workers, were the workforce of the factory. So again, you can't have unhappy workers. You've got to create an illusion that they are going to have a stake in the political setup, in the way in which the new country is run. Okay. So Bismarck realised that these pressures for democracy, pressures from below for democracy, needed to be controlled. He needed to grab hold of them. So when he created the new Germany in 1871 and drew up the constitution, the set of rules about how laws would be made and the institutions that would be in it, he made a decision to create an illusion that the middle classes and the lower classes would have some political influence, and that was a deliberate decision. So we will move on to that. So there was a German parliament called the Reichstag, and the voting for that system was not weighted. It was actually, whether you were upper class or middle class or lower class, your vote was the same as the others. Okay, but in reality, the Prussian upper classes did continue to really hang on to the strings of power in the new Germany. So I keep saying it, we will do this in future lessons. This is just an introduction to what we're going to be doing. So we will look at the constitution, the institutions. I kind of like touched upon them there. So in 1871, a decision was made that in this new Germany, across the whole of Germany, there would be elections, and all German men over the age of 25 would have an equal vote. So a lower class vote would be the same as a middle class, would be the same as an upper class vote, and they would send representatives to the Reichstag, which was the national parliament. So that's the point that was made there. There would be an elected representative assembly called the Reichstag. And Prussia as a state would continue to exist within the new Germany. So the Prussian government with the Prussian parliament, which was called the Landtag, which was not a fair body because the vote was weighted, would continue to exist. But the national parliament would be more representative than the Prussian parliament. Okay, so that's just an example of how the new German Empire appeared to be much, much more liberal. And on the whole, and this is our first depth study that we're moving into. Remember, 1871 to 1879 is our first depth study, and Bismarck was the Chancellor. He was the head of government of Germany. On the whole, Bismarck was very, very clever and a talented politician, and the first Kaiser of Germany, Wilhelm I, allowed Bismarck to get on with it. Okay, and between the two of them, they were a good pair. They worked well together, and they were on the whole very successful. The middle classes were on the whole happy with the new Germany. They felt engaged. They felt that the new Germany was more democratic, and there was a strong emotional sense this is good for us. So overall, the divisions that were there didn't really surface during the first 10 years of the new empire. Okay, so the ordinary people were pretty much bound and loyal to the new Kaiser who represented them. So that's the sort of overview. Now, there are examples of that which you just need to be aware of. And again, we will develop these in later lessons. But in that first 10 years, the first decade of Germany's existence, 1871 to 1880, the Reichstag, the national parliament, pretty much every time Bismarck spoke to them and said, I want a law passed on this, which will apply for the whole of Germany, he got their support. Okay, they were loyal to him, they supported him. So a whole range of laws were passed in the first 10 years. And what those laws did is they brought the 25 German states closer together. They created a greater sense of unity. So, for example, a law was passed that created a single currency. Before 1871, when there were separate German states, there were sort of 39 different currencies. A law was passed, and there was a single currency. Likewise, there was a single system of measurements, and there was a single weight system. They ironed out local differences. I mean, before 1871, they used to have 39 railway systems, and none of them would link up because the railway lines in one state would be X number of meters apart, and in a different state they would be different, and so they couldn't join up, sort of thing. So a law was passed. All the German railway systems had to have that common gauge, as it was known, the width of the railway, so they could actually move goods across Germany better. They passed laws that created national symbols, so a German flag. All those things which you take for granted needed to be created. So those laws were passed by Bismarck, but laws could not be passed without the Reichstag, and the Reichstag was elected by all German men over the age of 25, one man, one vote, all equal, and they worked together well to overcome many of the old divisions that were there before 1871 to create a single united country. Okay, so that's brought us up to date. There's the summary, and the only missing thing then, conclusion. Yeah, so just really, we've covered it all. So what are the key points? In reality, the new Germany was fragile. Okay, can't just assume that it suddenly became united. The outward appearance of unity did hide underlying divisions and tensions. Okay, there were three types, which we've covered now. However, Germany's first head of government, Otto von Bismarck, who led Germany until 1890, was a master at balancing those underlying tensions to preserve unity, to preserve in particular an illusion of unity, in order to make the new Germany stronger. And by 1890, when he resigned, and he didn't resign on good terms, he stepped out, he was very angry, and we'll look at that in a later lesson, Germany was on its way to becoming a great power. So from a country that didn't exist in 1871, by 1890 was sort of up there and was fighting for a position alongside Britain in particular as being the sort of like leading power of Europe. So final slide, just a few points. The German unification then was complex, it was incomplete. The newly unified nation did need to balance the various contradictions, that it did maintain the dominance of the Prussians. The word elite, it means the sort of like the top of the pyramid. But at the same time, it did need to integrate. It needed to somehow involve ordinary people, in particular the middle classes, so that they identified with the nation. There were many diverse religious and regional groups within the new Germany. They were uneasy that Prussia was more powerful. And Bismarck sought to overcome this by maintaining an illusion of democracy in the creation of New Germany, by allowing a new type of parliament, a national parliament that had a much fairer voting system, what we call universal suffrage, where it is one man, one vote. Now, women were not given the vote, but that was the norm in those days. But every man over the age of 25 for the national parliament had an equal vote. And by generating a sort of sense that, hey, we all need to work together because in particular there are external enemies, and in particular France. And so all Germans need to pull together under Prussian leadership for defensive purposes. And on the whole, in the first 10 years, Bismarck was successful in doing that. Okay, so that then adds into our summary, the conclusion. So there is the sort of completed picture from this first two lessons. So go back through, internalise, make sure you're comfortable with it. Remember that many of these points, most of these points actually, we're now picking up. This is an introductory lesson. It's just giving you the big picture, and we'll be drilling into most of these points over the next few lessons when we go into Depth Study 1. So the first proper lesson of Depth Study 1 then will be on the social structure of Imperial Germany, and there is your flip learning for our next lesson, which will be on Thursday next week. Hopefully that was useful for you, just sort of finishing off what we did, so we can just jump straight into the social structure of Imperial Germany. I'll put a message on the website, and I'll put another message onto your frog assignments, linking it to the website so that you know to play this video before the lesson. Thank you very much.